In a city of 19,000 people on the edge of Mobile, Alabama, there is a man whose job is to run the water. He did not campaign for it. Nobody elected him. A judge appointed him. On the 10th of November, 2023, a circuit judge in Mobile County signed an order handing control of an entire American city's water and sewer system to a court-appointed receiver because the board that was supposed to run it had stopped being able to. And when that receiver's office published what it had found, it put one number near the top. More than 60% of the water leaks out of the pipes before it reaches anybody's tap. 60%. Say that slowly. For every 10 gallons the city buys, treated and paid for, 6 of them go into the ground. At times it has been worse than that. A local newsroom put it in the plainest possible terms this June. The utility has lost 1 gallon for every gallon that made it to a customer. The town is number 1 on this list, and we will get there. This is the relocation file. Today, the 10 worst places to live in Alabama. And before the countdown starts, one piece of housekeeping, because it is the difference between this video and every other video with this title. These 10 are not ranked by a score. There is no index here, no weighting, no proprietary formula that assigns Selma a 6.2 and Gadsden a 7.4. Every list like that is unfalsifiable. You cannot check it, which means you cannot argue with it, which means it is worth nothing. Instead, each of these 10 places is here for a closure, a bankruptcy filing, a federal consent decree, a court order, a number in a census table with its margin of error attached. They are ordered by what the failure costs the people who lived there. Number 10 lost its jobs. Number 1 is losing its water. Every figure you see on screen will have its source printed next to it. In the moment it is spoken, pause it, look it up. If we are wrong, you will be able to prove we are wrong, and that is the point. One more thing, and it matters. Every town on this list gets a counterweight, something true that cuts the other way, said out loud in its own segment. Some of these places are climbing. Some of them have been written off by people who have never been there. A ranking that only prosecutes is a list of insults with a map attached, and there are enough of those already. Number 10. On a morning in April 2020, about 400 people in Gadsden, Alabama found out that the place their fathers had worked was closing for good. Goodyear announced it would permanently shut its Gadsden tire plant. The company had been in that town for 91 years is not a factory. 91 years is a town's entire idea of itself. It is the reason the high school has the enrollment it has. It is the reason the diner on the corner opened at 5 in the morning instead of 7. The mayor called it what it was, a cornerstone of the local economy, gone. And here is the detail that tells you the most about how this ended. The remaining employees, the 400 and some who were still there at the end, the union negotiated, and to let the plant close, they agreed to it. That is what running out of options looks like from the inside. Not a picket line, a vote. It is worth sitting with the arithmetic that a vote like that involves. You are 54 years old. You have 29 years in the plant. The company is offering a number, and the alternative to accepting a number is a fight you have watched other locals lose in other towns on the news for most of your working life. Your pension is a line item in somebody else's restructuring. Your house is worth what somebody in Gadsden will pay for it, and the number of people who want to buy a house in Gadsden is about to go down by 400 families. You take the buyout, everybody takes the buyout, and the plant that has been there since before your father was born goes quiet in the same week that a company in Akron publishes a press release about operational footprint. Gadsden had already been through a version of this. The plant had shed workers for years before the closure. This was the end of a long contraction rather than a sudden event, and everybody in town could read the trend line as well as any analyst could. That is its own kind of hard, not a shock, a thing you can see coming for a decade and cannot stop. Now the counterweight, and Gadsden has one. A multi-tenant industrial facility is planned for the former Goodyear site. The land is not going to sit there as a monument. That is a real thing and it deserves to be said. It is also not the same as what left. A multi-tenant facility is several employers with several logos and several payrolls, and none of them will be the reason a town exists for 91 years. Gadsden is number 10 because the loss is measurable, documented, and survivable. The 9 places above it are worse, and most of them are worse in ways that no buyout addresses. In March 2020, a building the size of a small airport opened in Bessemer, Alabama, and about 5,800 people went to work in it. The state had wanted that building badly. Alabama put together an incentives package to bring Amazon's BHM1 fulfillment center to Bessemer. $48 million of public money spent on the theory that a very large employer fixes a poor city. So here is the test of that theory 5 years on from the census. Bessemer, population 25,400, poverty rate plus or minus 5.1, median household income plus or minus 3,108. Alabama's poverty rate is 15.6%. The state's median household income is $63,999. So Bessemer runs at nearly double the state's poverty rate on about of the state's median household income after the largest single economic development bet the area has made this century. Those are estimates, and I want to be honest about what that means. But plus or minus is not decoration. Poverty at 28% could be 23, or it could be 33. The census tells you that on the record, and anybody who quotes the number without the band is selling you a precision that does not exist. While we are on the subject of numbers that do not exist, the widely repeated figure for Bessemer's per capita income is that it is well below $20,000. The census says that is not a small difference. It is not a rounding. Somebody wrote it, everybody copied it, and nobody opened the table. In 2021, the workers at that warehouse held the most watched union election in America. It failed 1,798 votes to 738. The counterweight for Bessemer is straightforward. BHM1 is still open, and it is among the largest employers in the county. 5,800 jobs in a city of 25,000 is not nothing, and the people who argued for that incentive package were not lying about the jobs arriving. They were wrong about what arriving would do. I nearly got this segment badly wrong, and I am going to show you how, because it is the whole reason this channel exists. The story about Wilcox County in the Black Belt of South Central Alabama is that the job market collapsed and never came back. Every secondary source I read said the same striking thing, that the average unemployment rate over the past 5 years has been 14% would be extraordinary. 14% is Detroit in 2009. The Bureau of Labor Statistics puts Wilcox County's unemployment rate in June 2026 at not 14, 6.4. The claim was off by more than double, and I would have read it out to you with a straight face. So what is actually true? Alabama's unemployment rate in the same month where Wilcox County runs, that is real, It is checkable and it is bad. It is simply not 14. And the census fills the rest in. Wilcox County, population 10,172. Poverty plus or minus 4.8 against a state figure of 15.6. Median household income plus or minus. Look at that margin of error, 19% on the headline income figure. In a county of 10,000 people, the census itself is telling you it is not certain within $8,000. I could have said 40,640 and moved on, and it would have sounded authoritative, and it would have been the same offense as the 14% committed by me instead of by them. The true version is still damning, and it is still checkable. Wilcox County works on about the state's median household income, at double the state's unemployment, with nearly double the state's poverty. One point of discipline. Everything in this segment is the Camden is the county seat, and it is a different geography with different numbers. Nothing you just heard is captioned as Camden, because it is not about Camden. The counterweight, an unemployment rate of 6.4 in a rural black belt county in 2026 is a considerably better number than that county has seen in living memory, and the people who lived there did that. It deserves to be said by somebody, since apparently the internet would rather tell you it is 14. Everybody knows the name of this town for one day in 1965. Almost nobody knows what happened to it on the 12th of January 2023. A tornado rated EF2 tracked roughly across Selma with peak winds of around damage estimated at over 250 homes in a town of about 17,000 people. Here is what that did. Selma has lost the mayor attributes a further 1,200 to 1,500 residents directly to that tornado, people whose houses came down and who did not come back. About of the people still there live below the poverty line. And the city has demolished since November as blight clearance. Not rebuilt, demolished. That is the work of a town removing its own damaged housing stock because nobody is coming to occupy it. The counterweight for Selma is small and it is real. So here it is with its actual size. 2 apartment developments are in progress, Lincoln 2 and Dull Point on Citizens Parkway, bringing between them 112 units against 250 houses destroyed and 145 demolished. That is a start, and it is honest to call it a start rather than a recovery. And there is something particular about this town being on a list like this. Selma is not an obscure place. It is one of the most consequential few square miles in American history, and it is visited every year by people who come specifically to walk across that bridge. A town with that much national meaning attached to it is a town that gets attention in March and silence in every other month. The tornado is the clearest illustration of it. The 23-mile EF2 tore through a nationally significant American city in January 2023 and destroyed 250 homes. And if you are not from Alabama, there is a reasonable chance this is the first you have heard of it. Which brings up the thing that makes recovery arithmetic so brutal in a small city. When 250 homes come down in a town of 17,000, that is not a housing problem you solve with insurance. Much of the damaged stock was older, owned outright by people without a mortgage and frequently without a policy, and the value of the house before the storm was often less than the cost of rebuilding it afterwards. So the house does not get rebuilt, it gets demolished, and the count of demolitions climbs past the count of new units, which is exactly the ratio the mayor is describing. Selma is number 7 because what happened to it was weather, and weather is nobody's decision. The 6 places above it involve decisions. On the 19th of May, 2020, the city of Fairfield, Alabama filed for Chapter 9 bankruptcy, the first city or county in the United States to do so in nearly a year. Population, about outstanding long-term debt, nearly cities do not file for bankruptcy the way people do. It is rare, it is slow, and it means the arithmetic stopped working some years earlier. Here is when it stopped working. In 2015, U.S. Steel ended steelmaking at Fairfield Works, of roughly 1,300 jobs. In 2016, the Walmart Supercenter closed, and with it the sales tax receipts that a small city budget is actually built on. And then the services started going. The local transit authority stopped bus service. The city faced having its for non-payment. And read that list again slowly because it is a sequence, and the sequence is the story. First the employer, then the sales tax, then the buses, which is how people without cars get to the jobs that are left, then the police. That is not a town with problems. That is a town being disassembled in a documented order. And each step makes the next one likelier, which is the part that people who have never lived it tend to miss. When the buses stop, the people who cannot drive stop being able to reach the jobs that still exist in the next town over. When those people lose those jobs, they stop paying the municipal fees the city was counting on. When the police force is handed to the county, response times are set by somebody whose budget is not yours and whose priorities are county-wide. None of that is a scandal. Nobody stole anything. There is no villain in the Fairfield story at all, which is exactly why it belongs on this list. It is what happens when a mid-century American city built around one enormous employer on one big box sales tax base loses both inside 18 months, and the machinery of local government simply does not have a setting for that. And this town was not a place the mill happened to arrive in. This town was built by the mill. Fairfield was founded in by the Tennessee Coal, Iron, and Railroad Company, a U.S. Steel subsidiary, as a planned model industrial city to house the workers of Fairfield Works. It was not called Fairfield. It was called after William Ellis Corey, the second president of U.S. Steel. Then, U.S. Steel renamed the town after Fairfield, Connecticut, the hometown of a different executive, James A. Farrell. The reason for the change was that Corey's marital affairs had become a public scandal, and the company wanted its model city to stop carrying his name. So the name on the water tower was chosen twice, both times in a boardroom, and the second time because of an executive's private life. When a company names a town, builds the town, staffs the town, and then a century later closes the plant the town was built around, what is left is not a city with an unemployment problem. It is a purpose-built object whose purpose has been withdrawn. The counterweight, Chapter 9 is a restructuring, not a death certificate. It exists so that a city can keep operating while it renegotiates what it owes, and Fairfield is still there, still incorporated, still holding elections. Fairfield is number 6 because it is the clearest example on this list of a place where the finances failed in public, on the record, with a docket number. In 2024, Birmingham broke a record that had stood since 1933. The city ended the year with counting 11 additional justifiable homicides. The total reached, passing the previous record of, set in 1933. 1933, the depths of the Depression, in a steel town at the bottom of the steel market. And the rate is worse than the count because there are fewer people in Birmingham now than there were then. The 2024 murder rate was about, in 1933, it was about Now, every other video with this title will give you that record and stop. It is the best number they have, and it is 9 months out of date. Here's what happened next. In the first half of 2025, Birmingham recorded against by the midpoint of 2024, roughly halved. Halved in 1 year from a record high. I do not know how durable that is, and anybody who tells you they do is guessing. Half-year figures move. But it is the most recent thing that is true, and leaving it out to protect the narrative is exactly the kind of thing this channel is supposed to catch other people doing. There is a reason the rate matters more than the count, and it is the thing that makes Birmingham different from the other 9 places on this list. Birmingham's population peaked at the 2024 figure as the city is than it was at its peak. And in 1930, 3 years before the record this segment is about, it held people more than it holds today. That is the whole reason the rate broke the record while the count did not. Every per capita number in a city like that gets worse without anything new going wrong, because the denominator keeps shrinking. When people leave, the tax base leaves with them, and the streetlights and the patrol cars and the code enforcement are funded by whoever stayed. And this is where a video like this one usually goes wrong. The homicide figure describes a small number of blocks. It does not describe Birmingham. The city has a research university and a medical center that is one of the largest employers in the state, and the overwhelming majority of the people who live there will go their entire lives without being near any of what produced that record. Publishing a citywide murder rate as though it is a description of daily life for 196,000 people is the kind of thing that makes a number technically true and practically a lie. I am putting it on this list because it happened and because it broke a 91-year record. I am not going to pretend it is the whole city. Birmingham is number 5 on this list on the strength of 2024. If 2025 holds, it does not belong on next year's, and I would rather be the channel that said that in advance than the one that quietly stops mentioning the town. In December 2008, a dam failed at the Tennessee Valley Authority's Kingston fossil plant in Tennessee, and a very large quantity of coal ash went into the river. It had to go somewhere. Some of it were shipped south to the Arrowhead landfill outside Uniontown, Alabama. Coal ash contains arsenic, mercury, and selenium. Uniontown is about, with a median household income of about. In 2013, filed a civil rights complaint with the Environmental Protection Agency under Title VI of the Civil Rights Act, arguing that the state environmental agency's authorization of that landfill had a disparate impact on black residents' health, property values, and the degradation of a cemetery. In 2018, the EPA rejected the complaint, citing 5 years to reach insufficient evidence. And there is a detail here that I think about more than any other on this list. The landfill's operator, the American Civil Liberties Union, took up their defense. People in a town with a $14,000 median income were sued for objecting in public to what was being put next to them. Consider what that means practically. You are a retired school teacher in a town of 2,000 people. You put your name to a complaint about a landfill. A company with a legal department files a defamation action naming you personally. You do not have a lawyer. You do not have a retainer. The cost of losing is your house. The chilling effect is the point of a suit like that, and it does not require winning. The cemetery detail in the resident's complaint is the one that stays with me. Among the harms they listed was the degradation of a burial ground, a place where the people who founded that community are buried, sitting in the shadow of 4 million tons of somebody else's ash. There is a version of environmental regulation in this country where that fact alone settles the question of where the landfill goes. That is not the version that operates in Perry County. And I want to be precise about what the EPA actually decided, because it is frequently mischaracterized. The agency did not find that the landfill was harmless. It found insufficient evidence that state officials had violated the Civil Rights Act in permitting it. Those are very different findings. One is about a landfill, the other is about paperwork. The town also runs open-air sewage spray fields under a Clean Water Act enforcement action that has sat in state court for years. The counterweight, the residents did not lose. They fought the defamation suit with the ACLU, and Uniontown's case became one of the most cited environmental justice fights in the country. The place is not passive, and it never was. From 1935 to 1971, 36 years, Monsanto manufactured PCBs in Anniston, Alabama. The Department of Justice's own account is that excess PCBs and PCB-bearing acid were routinely discharged into the plant's sewer, which ran into open ditches and creeks, and that PCB waste was placed in on the plant property. Open ditches. In a town. In 2003, Monsanto and Solutia settled 2 lawsuits for including a fund for roughly plaintiffs. 21,000 plaintiffs. Anniston's population at the time was around 24,000. A 2002 federal consent decree required court-supervised remediation estimated at or more, along with a medical clinic for low-income residents, health screenings, and a prescription benefit. A consent decree that includes building a clinic is a document that is given up on the idea that the harm can be undone. Here's the detail that changes how the whole thing reads. PCBs do not break down. That is the property that made them commercially valuable. They are chemically stable. They do not burn. They do not degrade, which is exactly why they were put into electrical equipment across the industrial world. The same property means that what went into those ditches in 1948 is, in the relevant sense, still there. So a cleanup of a PCB site is not a cleanup in the way anybody means the word. It is containment. It is capping and removal and monitoring indefinitely of a substance that has no expiry date and no natural process working on your side. Congress banned the manufacture of PCBs in the United States in 1976 under the Toxic Substances Control Act. Monsanto had stopped producing them at Anniston 5 years before that, which means that for the last 5 years of the Anniston plant's PCB production, the company was operating in a period the rest of the country was already moving to end. The counterweight, and Anniston has earned it. This is one of the few places on this list where the people harmed actually won. They sued, they proved it, and they collected $700 million is not a symbolic sum, and 21,000 plaintiffs is not a token class. The remediation is court supervised, which means somebody outside the company has to sign off on whether it is working. That is a better outcome than most communities in this position ever get. It arrived 32 years after production stopped. Anniston is number 3 because 36 years is longer than most of the people affected had been alive, and because the record of it is not disputed. It is in a federal consent decree. In 2017, researchers tested residents of Lowndes County, Alabama for hookworm. Hookworm is a parasite that lives in soil contaminated by human waste. It is associated with poverty in the developing world. It was supposed to have been eliminated from the United States decades ago. Of those tested, came back positive. And then the thing that makes this number 2 rather than number 5, presented with those findings to Alabama Department of Public Health, published a notice on its official website stating that in Lowndes County, the finding was not challenged with a better study. It was answered with a denial in public by the agency responsible. In May 2023, the United States Department of Justice reached a settlement with the Alabama Department of Public Health, under Title VI of the Civil Rights Act. The Assistant Attorney General described residents exposed to raw sewage in their neighborhoods, their yards, their playgrounds, their schools, and inside their own homes. The agreement meant residents would no longer face criminal penalties for failing to have septic systems that work. And in Black Belt soil, conventional septic systems frequently do not work at any price. In April 2025, that agreement was following the executive order ending federal diversity, equity, and inclusion programs.
The first settlement of its kind in the history of the Justice Department lasted.
Lowndes County sits between Selma and Montgomery on the road people marched down in 1965.
It is about black households that have a median income of about $23,500 against roughly $61,500 for white households in the same county, and 33% of black residents live below the poverty line against 8.1% of white residents. Those two sets of numbers describe the same county, the same roads, the same schools, the same health department. And the engineering reason underneath all of it is almost boringly physical. Black Belt soil is dense clay. Conventional septic systems work by letting effluent percolate away through the ground. And in that clay, it does not percolate. It comes back up. A working system for that soil costs many thousands of dollars in a county where a third of one group of residents lives below the poverty line. So people ran a pipe out the back of the house to the tray line because the alternative was the sewage staying in the house. And under Alabama law, that was a crime. Residents faced criminal penalties for the failure of a technology to work in the dirt they happened to live on. That is what the 2023 agreement stopped, and that is what the 2025 termination restored. The counterweight, the underlying problem is engineering, and engineering has answers. There are working pilot programs for decentralized systems suited to Black Belt clay, and the county's residents forced this onto the national agenda from a standing start with no money and no leverage, and got the Department of Justice to hand you. They should not have needed to. Prichard, Alabama, population about 19,000, on the edge of Mobile. We started with the number, so here is how it happened. In 2019, the Prichard Waterworks and Sewer Board borrowed, it defaulted, the bondholder sued. On the 10th of November 2023, Mobile County Circuit Judge Michael Youngpeter ordered a receiver appointed to run the system. That is what a receivership is. It is what happens when a court decides the existing management cannot be left in charge of the thing. And the finding at the center of it, from the water distribution system, think about what that means for a household bill. Every gallon that leaks was bought, it was treated, it was pumped. Somebody has to pay for all of that, and the only people available to pay for it are the customers who received the other 40%. So the residents of Prichard have been paying for water that went into the ground under their streets. And now the counterweight, which is the most important one in this video. Under the receiver, the volume of water the system had to buy. That is the first real reversal of the trend. 12% in 1 year. After decades of the number going the other way, that is repaired pipe. That is somebody finding leaks and closing them. There is a second thing that happens in a system like this, and it is worse than the bills. When more than half your treated water is leaving the pipe, you are also losing pressure. A distribution main that keeps losing pressure is a main that can pull the wrong way outside groundwater into the same cracks the treated water went out of. That is why a system in this condition ends up issuing boil notices. The risk is not that the treatment plant failed, it is that the pipe between the plant and the kitchen stopped being a sealed thing. So the 60% is not an efficiency statistic, it is a public health posture. And now the part that people outside a town like this consistently fail to understand. A water system is not a service the city buys. It is an asset the city owns, and assets have to be renewed on a schedule, a percentage of the mains replaced every year, forever, whether or not anything appears to be wrong. Skip that for a decade and nothing happens. Skip it for 40 years, and you get Prichard, a network where the failures arrive faster than any crew can close them, and where the cost of catching up has grown past what 19,000 ratepayers could ever carry. That is why the bond debt matters as much as the leak rate, borrowed in 2019, defaulted on. Borrowing to fix a system this far gone is a bet that you can repair faster than you deteriorate. Prichard lost that bet, and then the bondholders came, and then the judge came. I want to be careful about how I say the next part, because it is the part that gets the town insulted by people who have never been there. The population of Prichard has been falling for decades. Fewer customers means less revenue, means less renewal, means more leaks, means higher bills, means fewer customers. That loop is not a judgment about anybody who lives there. It is arithmetic, and it runs the same way in every shrinking industrial city in the United States. The reason you have heard of Flint and not of Prichard is not that Prichard's numbers are better. Prichard is number one on this list because losing your water is the most fundamental failure a municipality can have. Everything else on this list you can work around. You can drive to a job in the next county. You can send your child to a different school. You cannot carry water. And it took a court order to get anyone to act on it. It is also the town on this list with the clearest evidence that the direction can change. A 12% fall in 1 year, achieved by a receiver with the authority to actually spend on pipe. Which raises the obvious question about the 30 years before somebody was given that authority. Look back at the 10 and notice what is missing. Not one of these places is on this list because of the people who live there. Gadsden lost a factory decision made in a boardroom. Bessemer got a warehouse. The state paid $48 million for. Wilcox County has a labor market. Selma had weather. Fairfield ran out of sales tax. Birmingham had a record year and then halved it. Uniontown received 4 million tons of another state's coal ash. Anniston had a chemical plant for 36 years. Lowndes County got a settlement and then had it cancelled. Prichard has pipes. Every one of those is a system. Not one of them is a character flaw. That is worth saying because the genre of this video belongs to almost never says it. The format rewards contempt, a list of towns, a list of insults, a map. It is easy and it performs. The trouble is that it is also wrong, and you can check that it is wrong, which is why every number in this video arrived with its source attached and its margin of error printed. 3 of the claims I started with did not survive that process. Wilcox County's unemployment was supposed to be 14%. It is 6.4%. Bessemer's per capita income was supposed to be well below $20,000. It is $25,797. And the water loss figure I very nearly used for Prichard was one I had rounded myself before the receiver's own filing corrected me upward. Every one of those would have made this video more dramatic. All 3 were wrong. Next time, the other direction, the Alabama towns that are actually growing, and what the census says about who is moving into them. Where to live, where not to. Every number sourced